the exec and staff, and our esteemed members of the Fourth Estate. As always, very, very welcome. Good to see you here, Matt and Sam. I'm just calling I'll formally open the meeting, but can I just remind people that we are being live streamed. This is live streamed. It will be available on YouTube. And if I could ask members and everyone to either switch phones off or to silent, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. I'll call for apologies. We have one from Councillor Kitty. Otherwise, I think we're all here. Deputy Mayor is in absentia just at the moment, but we'll record her for lateness. Please, thank you very much. Otherwise, I think we are all here. Yeah, we are. Can I have a mover and a seconder for apologies, please? Larry, thank you. And Kelvin, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Against and carried, thank you very much. We have, in the public forum, I'd just like to welcome Emma and Joel to talk about Clean the Air. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for granting us this time, 10B. The first image that is on the screen is the destruction of Beirut. The reason we wanted to bring this up today is, and we know that on your agenda this afternoon you are going to be looking at the Mount, in particular the industrial site, and as it relates to Whareroa Marae. The Mount is Whareroa, Whareroa is the Mount. Okay, so what happens, we basically, looking at this image, this is now the Mount. Those yellow dots are from your hazardous activities and industrial list. As you can see, there are a lot of them scattered around really close to our residential communities. Now, a lot of those will be not presenting a massive danger to the public. However, I'd like to point out that 10 of those sites are actually major incident sites that, we don't want another Beirut in the Mount. So may I ask a question, Mayor? Ultimately, who is responsible for this area? Like, if there were a major incident, is it Mayor? Is it staff?
Sorry, it is in the, I'll defer to Nick, but it is in the Tauranga City Council Territorial Authority in the terms of, permits and what have you, but there will be a part of that, depending on what it is and what the issue is, that will fall to the Regional Council. Barbara, do you want to? Thank you.
I understand your question correctly. If something happened, it would be an emergency management event, yep, which, depending on the severity of it, would be local authority or regional authority, depending on the size of it. Okay. The Mayor's correct as far as consent's a perspective from a building. It's the TAs, us, and from the wider regional consent, it's both Regional Council and Tauranga City Council. Is that what you were meaning, Emma? Or?
Yes, I mean, I guess...
Sorry, there's one more. Hazardous substances in your... hazardous substances for commercial is the Ministry.
Okay. So I think a lot of the input we're getting from the community is they're highly concerned that we have a potential Beirut situation here, and we want to make 100% sure that this can't happen, not just as it relates to ammonium nitrate, but to the substances that are stored in here. We'd like to make sure that this can't happen. We believe, like the problem we have now with Regional Council, where we have a polluted airshed that, perhaps too many permits have been given out without taking into account the accumulative effect. Individually, they might be moderately low risk, but accumulatively, what's the chain reaction if something bad were to happen here? Look, thanks to some of our Mount councillors, they are looking at a Mount vision, which is good, and they're looking at, kind of how we can present a more united and forward-thinking vision of the Mount. However, we're not looking at the cancerous elephant in the room, which is our industrial site, which has the most polluted air, the most contaminated sites, and the most amount of hazardous, major hazard instance potentially in the region, with 10 out of the 15 in our whole region being situated here. So, we have this residential area so close to all of these. The juxtaposition is this beautiful best beach in New Zealand, and I just think that we need to, what is the vision we want for the Mount? Is it this, the number one beach in the country? How can we be talking about that when we've got this terrible pollution problem? I'm just flicking through this because I'm aware of the time, and I want to. There's so much going on in this area, and we wanted to get in front of you just to reiterate how important it is for Tauranga City to really take the reins here and to look after and to really be looking at this this area. We've got the most polluted air. It looks like I'm a bad housekeeper, but that's from my windowsill. That's black dust that Mount residents breathe, that our children breathe in the sports fields. Okay, so this is a really urgent problem to us right now. I'd like to pass over to Joel. As I said, Joel is going to speak.
Kia ora, tēnā tātou. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you all today. And I just want to also thank those members of council that have brought this from the Tauranga Moana Advisory Group to the table to the council. So thank you. First of all, I just want to reiterate and support Emma and the wider Mount community. Being at Whariro is kaitiaki for everybody in the Mount. Not only are we responsible for our own elderly and children, but we also hold the responsibility of the health and the well-being of everybody in the Mount. It pains us to see that not only are we at the forefront, but there's children, families and elderly that are being subjected to the chemicals and particle matter and potential dangers that are the reality of living in the Mount. As you can see there, that's our reality in Whariro. When I presented to the Tauranga Moana Advisory Group, this is our reality here. All of those chemicals that you see there are all of the chemicals that we're breathing, that whether our elderly that are seated here today, whether it's the children, our babies that go to the kohanga reo, or whether it's our children, collective children that are running around our community, and yourselves when you visit us. So that's our reality. All of those chemicals, if you look up all of those chemicals, those are anyone that are chemically minded, is the cumulative harm that has on the human body. And if that's not acceptable for your children, it's not acceptable for mine. It's not acceptable for the daycare that your children go to, or your grandchildren, then it's not acceptable for our tamariki that go to our kohanga reo. Again, if it's not acceptable for your elderly, your parents or grandparents at their rest home, then it's not acceptable for my kaumātua who are seated here, who live at our marae. So I just want to just to remind our councillors that this is our reality, and if it's not okay for your whānau, then it's not okay for ours, and it's not okay for Emma and anyone else down in the Mount. We've got grave concerns around the safety, as Emma mentioned, around if there is a hazard. There's huge hazards in the Mount, and unfortunately, as councillors, you've inherited this over since the 1960s. But I guess now's the time. In 2020, it's time to make responsible decisions around addressing the hazards that are there. I guess when Emma mentions Beirut, how can the city manage a situation as dire as Beirut when we can't manage a chemical spill at Lota? Those that don't know, on the same evening as the Whakaari or White Island eruption, Lota Chemical Solutions, which is just the chimney stack next to the logs, they had a chemical spill. There's only one way in, one way out, okay, and we couldn't get to our children, and our kaumātua to make sure they were safe. The fire service couldn't tell us what the seriousness of the incident was. And when we asked how to get our children, we were told, you need to tell them, ring them and tell them to run out onto the motorway. You pull up on the side of the motorway, throw them in, and then get out of there. Now that's during peak hour traffic, and what we're talking about there is an 8 and a 6-year-old that is being told to being run out onto the motorway. Again, if that's not okay for your children or grandchildren, then it shouldn't be okay for any grandchildren or children in this country, and definitely not in Tauranga City. So I just wanted to raise that. In terms of hazards, that's very real. If we can't manage something like a chemical spill, how can we manage a chemical spill out of Ixon, Hexion, or how can we monitor an an explosion that is very possible at Lauta, Balance, or any other of these hazardous industries. So I really do I just want to put it out to the city from someone that lives here, that's living at Whareroa. I really implore you as councillors and as the mayor and as leaders of this beautiful city to take back the keys to the city. Who has the keys to the city? Is it you guys who we all voted for? Is it the Port of Tauranga? Is it these industries? Is it Bapini Regional Council who own the port? Or is it you guys? I believe it's you guys. So you councillors, so I really do implore you to please take back the keys to the city, be the responsibilities that I know you are, and really lead Tauranga City into a better future than what we currently have. Thank you.
And just to wrap up from my end, if you'd grant us another quick 2 minutes, Tenby, we do have some asks. We'd like you to run some worst case scenario analysis, if that's possible, on the current sites that are there, the major hazard sites, and to investigate our readiness into how we would handle a major incident. The port growth and the industry growth in the last few years has been substantial. Have our emergency services grown along with that? Can we find out whether, if there were a big explosion, do we have enough resources? I think I wasn't here, but when the Rena disaster happened, it took apparently 4 days to get anyone here to clean up the oil. But anyway, we couldn't have that if there was a chemical fire. And finally, if you have the power to enact an urgent plan change to prevent further hazardous activities moving into the area, I think if you guys can do that, the last thing we need in the Mount right now is a more hazardous industries moving in until we've done an audit on whether we can cope with what we've got now. And then finally, the level, there's a lot going on at the moment. We've got methyl bromide hearings all week. That is in itself a whole nother topic, and it's extremely, extremely disturbing. At the Port of Tauranga, they are fumigating 80,000 logs a week, and a lot of it just goes up into the air and across our sports fields. And anyway, the community is very unhappy, and we're having a rally. We'd like to invite all of the elected members to come Thursday, and to regional council as well. We'd love them to come. If Mayor Tenby, you would address the public, that would be fantastic if you're able to attend. If not, perhaps you would delegate that to somebody, because we do want to know that we're safe, and we want to know that you've got our backs, both for methyl bromide and for obviously an impending hazardous situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Excuse me, and Joel. Thank you. This is something that we will take very seriously. There's no doubt about that. As it transpires, just as coincidence has it, I know Beirut reasonably well. It was a city I loved, and was devastated, and have many friends here still. Was devastated to read about what happened to the port. And that slide, excuse me, that you put up with the orange dots scattered around the isthmus, around the peninsula, is telling. It's really very telling indeed. So you certainly have my commitment to support conversations that we will need to have with our regional partners, clearly with iwi and with others to take this forward. But can I just ask councillors questions? Councillor Aubrey.
Tēnā korua. Can you just talk a little bit more about how many kaumātua you have living there, how many tamariki and people living on the site with the marae, and talk about some of those things you spoke to us about at the advisory board in terms of closing your windows, switching on the aircon?
Yep, so we've got a standing community of about 80 to 90 people. 80% of those are either under 10 or over 60. Why I mention that is because those are your two groups that are most susceptible to real risk from accumulative harm from air pollution. So that's 80% of our community. And then we've got the Kohanga Reo, Early Childhood Education Centre, which has a roll of 20 and staff of 5. And then we've got the iwi officers, Te Runanga o Naitarangi, who have any given day between 30 to 40 people. So we're looking at a community well over, that's bordering on 150 that are there every day. And again, 80% of that are in the two groups that are most at risk to accumulative harm from air pollution that you could see on the that was up there. That's what we've got. We would have a whole lot more if people weren't too scared to come home. We've got people who are being forced to leave because they're too scared for their own children's health. So what we're talking about there is that children that should be able to be raised at their marae can no longer be because of the serious health concerns. And they're real. They're very real when you have to watch your child spew up. They're real when you have to, during lockdown, take one of your elderly aunties to her doctor, and her doctor tells her that it's because she's living at whareru. And they're real when you're out there playing with your kids and you get a headache and start getting nauseous yourself, and then you start tasting and smelling the pollution and odours that is coming from both Balance and Lauta. So some people say that we need to have proof that we're getting sick before anyone will take action. Now I've just told you what I've experienced. We've got a floor of people who could tell you their own experiences. But this is real. This is real when you have families that are ring-fenced by heavy industry. And this is just the air pollution that's going on in 2020, 2019. You know, I fear looking in deeper into what the air pollution that was being subjected to family members that are no longer here in the 60s, 70s and 80s. When we're talking about the odour, so while you were all having Christmas on the beach or a barbecue outside with your family, we couldn't do that at home because of the stench that was coming from Lauta Chemical Solutions, where we had to take our family indoors and close all of the windows and put on the air conditioning. So we can't enjoy those same, rights and opportunities that everybody should be able to as New Zealanders. Further to that is that I made the mistake of cracking the window just ever so slightly, 2 windows, and then went to sleep, only to be woken at 2 o'clock, around about 1, 2 o'clock in the evening, because my house was full of a rancid odour that was everywhere. I couldn't go into the bathroom to sleep, I couldn't sleep in my children's room, I couldn't sleep in the lounge because it was everywhere. And I see Sarah Munson there from Regional Council, who I rang, and who was, I'm thankful that she rang me early the next morning. But this is our reality. I had to ring the fire service because I felt like they were the only people who don't have an agenda in terms of keeping the safety and well-being of New Zealanders. So, kia ora.
Kia ora, Joel. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Hughes.
Could we have the slide, your recommendations up on here? Can I ask a question of staff? The hazard of these, the hazard worst case scenario analysis of the current sites and the investigation to readiness to handle a major incident, how would we go about that? Is that something that our council would need to action, or is that something that we would need to ask regional council to action? What's the...
You look, any response to a major incident would be a multi-agency response. It would be done under the banner of a civil defence, emergency management response. And so, yeah, an exercise, I would be very surprised if exercises like this haven't occurred in the past, where multi-agencies come together, whether in person or as a desktop. But we could actually, I think, report back on this at some stage to provide an update to council, where this is at.
And if I can add, we actually did have an event at the airport 3 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago, where it was a multi-agency response to a hazardous substance incident.
And I can add, as chair of the CDM, that there was talk of a desktop. It wasn't a live one, but there was a desktop scenario exercise that was being discussed for planning, and maybe it could lift into the real thing. It's just, maybe it's time. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. Could I, one supplementary, enacting an urgent plan change to prevent further hazardous activities moving into the area. Could we have comment around that, what that would involve, and whether that's in our the realm of possibility, or it's within TCC, or where that sits?
Yeah, look, we've actually got a report coming up shortly where we can talk to that. I think
Within
that's
that,
the best.
yep.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we cover that in the report that's coming up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the staff, the recommendations that are before us on the screen, would they be within the scope of the report that's coming up in terms of that piece of work with Regional Council? Would those matters be addressed or raised in that report?
We can make sure that they are discussed.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Arbery again, and followed by Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I'm happy to move when the time is right. Can you talk a little bit about to the report, sorry. Can you talk as well about what the District Health Board has been able to say about whether it's safe to live there right now or not?
When we had a hui or meeting at the marae where it was across City Council, Regional Council, DHB Toitora and MFE, Dr. Jim Miller got up and said that he doesn't need to do any testing because he already knows how dangerous it is living at Whareroa. So for those that don't know, there's international research that's been done from medical officers all around the world around air pollution. Regional Council have now got the data from collecting it for since 2016 off the top of my head at Whareroa that shows that at Whareroa we are being subjected to levels of air pollution from particle matter, PM10, and also a number of chemicals every day. So that's when Dr. Jim Miller said he does not need to do any testing because he knows how unsafe it is at Whareroa. And I dare say how unsafe it is for our children to be playing at Blake Park as well.
Your Honour, thank you. Councillor Robson.
Joel, Emma, thank you. Has anyone denied this issue? Anyone that you've approached with this, have they denied it?
Industries have told us to our face that the pollution that we're being subjected to at Whareroa is not of the a health concern. They've told us that they would be happy for their children to be living there. However, that's very easy to say when your children aren't actually living there.
So just for clarification, because I really need to get my head around this. So industry, with a high degree of self-interest, says it's fine, but medical experts, air pollution experts, independent experts say it's not. No, I'm clear, thank you.
Good.
Well,
Thanks, Tembi. Hey, thanks for coming along, Tina and Joel, and sharing your concerns. Just a question through to the staff, through the chair. Has any research been done from the council to other ports throughout New Zealand, maybe the likes of Auckland, Wellington, Napier, as regards to issues they are having, possibly having?
Are you talking about in terms of air pollution? And look, I don't know. That would be a matter, I think, for the regional council to respond to. Essentially, we don't do, as a council, we don't do air testing. It's a regional council function.
Maybe it's just worth a little bit of research here. What I'm trying to do here is that the fact if, okay, if they're controlling it in those areas and we're not, just sets a good example, I feel, personally.
Yeah, again, I think the report that we're about to receive, that's if it's next on the agenda, discusses a joint approach by the regional and district council to navigating our way forward.
thank you, councillors. Any other questions of Joel or Emma? Emma, could you just put the slide up with the date? It's the 14th at 5 at Rata Street, Port Interest. Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Really appreciate you coming in.
Mr Chair, I just wonder if you might advise all our friends that we are about to do that item and you may want to stay.
Yeah, you're absolutely very welcome to stay if you wish. Of course. We are, excuse me, Council, on to item number 3, acceptance for late items. I don't believe there is any. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. I don't believe there is any of those, nor is there a change to the order of business. Confirmation of the minutes, there are none. Declaration of conflicts of interest, I take it there is none to be updated. Deputations, presentations, petitions, there are nil. Recommendations from other committees. We have a recommendation from the PSOC of your meeting of the 4th of August 2020. Thank you very much, Councillor Baldock. Can I have a second of that? Deputy Mayor Salisbury, did you want to speak to that at all? Either of you? Does anybody else want to speak to the recommendation? Can I put it to you then, please? All those in favour, please say aye. Against, any abstentions, and carried. Thank you very much. Which leads us on to number 10, the business of the day, and specifically 10.1, Whareroa Marae, industrial issues. Nick, if I can ask you to speak to this, please. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Let me just start by acknowledging our previous speakers, Joel and Emma. Thank you for your time. I'd also like to acknowledge Sarah Omundson, as you heard mentioned in the presentation, who is here from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. As you might be aware from the report I'm about to present, Tauranga City Council attended the Bay of Plenty Regional Council meeting last week. And Sarah is the General Manager of the Regulatory Services part of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and is attending, as we attended the council meeting last week, and here to offer support. I thought I might start by just speaking through the report. We've had a bit of background from Joel in particular around Whareroa and the impacts there. If you see from the report, there is attached at the back of it a PowerPoint presentation that I believe Joel gave to the Tauranga Moana Advisory Group, and that was that presentation that led to the resolution, recommendation rather, that we're discussing today. So, by way of summary, look, I thought I might just go through that recommendation because it is critical to understanding why we're here today. The recommendation is the urgent development of an action plan in collaboration with Whareroa Marae, and as a first step, commission an independent and comprehensive report to investigate the potential for instigating managed retreat of pollutant industries from Tōtara Road, south of Hewletts Road, and report back to this committee when completed. So that's a reference back to Tauranga Moana Advisory Group. And the reason that we are here today, as the Regional Council was asked to consider last week, is to consider that recommendation and the suggested way forward. As you will have seen in my report, the Regional Council and Tauranga City Council have been coordinating as to how to implement that recommendation, and you will see that also attached to my report is a memorandum from Paul Beverley, the partner of the law firm Buddle Finlay. Paul is a highly respected RMA practitioner, but also with a long track record of operating in Treaty of Waitangi settlement matters, and also a recognised, I suppose, expert in the sorts of issues that we've been discussing today. His memorandum recommends a slightly different tack in the sense that he is looking at options as a first step, because this is a complicated matter, and I have set out some of the background in my report and the overlapping legislation that we've heard a bit about just earlier, not only the RMA but also hazardous substances, and we have, in addition, I don't think it's been covered to date, but we also have things like climate change in and around this area as well to be factored in. So I endorse Paul's recommendation. I believe the Regional Council at their meeting last week similarly endorsed that approach of having that initial options investigation take place. We're anticipating for the marae community in particular that Paul will come up and meet you all and be able to discuss things face to face, and of course that's a commitment that both councils make to support that process as well. Perhaps the only other point in addition to note is because of the technical nature of this issue and the points that we've been discussing today, Paul has recommended a planning expert attend as well, and that's recommended in his memorandum, but it's the firm Mitchell Dash. And again, I would endorse that approach because this is one where you have to tackle it from both the, I suppose if you want, the legal side of things and how the RMA operates, but also from, as we've heard today, discussion of things like plan changes. I suppose to answer the question that's just arisen in the presentation about hazardous substances in particular, I think that's probably a slightly different aspect to what we've been considering so far, but certainly I don't see any particular issue with factoring that into Mr Beverley's work if that's something sought by the council. Alternately, I do recognise that some of the points being discussed by you, Emma, in particular are about the wider Mount area, and the Tauranga Moana Advisory Group recommendation is more specific to the immediate area around Whareroa. So again, I suppose we can be guided as staff by the councillors' views on this, but it could be a separate process to discuss hazardous substances in the wider area. But by and large, I suppose the purpose of today is, again, to go to the recommendations, I guess for this organisation, as the Regional Council did, to authorise the high-level investigations to explore managed retreat of heavy industries in that area immediately surrounding Whareroa Marae. On that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nick. I'm happy to move this from the chair. If I can get a second to Heidi. Thank you very much. Any questions? Sorry. Yeah, questions? You have an issue, Councillor Robson?
Yeah, I assume questions to the report? Yep,
asking
thank
for
you.
questions now. I just said that I'm happy to move it from the chair, and I wanted a second, and now we can take questions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So I'm concerned about the scope, so my question relates to the scope of the report. There is damage clearly being done now, and talk of a managed retreat, given the wheels of these things, is then. And I suppose my question to someone, somewhere, is what are we doing now? What can we do now? And has that question been asked? If it hasn't been asked, I'm asking it. If it's been asked and answered, can I see the answer, please? Because, yeah, so...
Yes, I can speak to some of, I guess, the relatively long history of this matter. So, along with representatives from the Regional Council, WorkSafe, Toitiora, Ministry for the Environment, there have been a number of discussions that both myself, Barbara, and I believe Christine have been involved in relation to, in particular, I guess, air pollution issues, but I suppose wider land use activities in the Mount area, and in particular the interface of industrial and residential activity. As a result, I suppose, of those discussions, but more particularly, I guess the studies in particulate matter in the air, the Ministry for the Environment has declared a polluted airshed. I'm not, as the Chief Executive alluded to, this is primarily a regional council function. However, that's no light step. To my knowledge, only once has it been used, I believe, in Rotorua. That led to changes to regional council rules and quite a difficult regime if you wanted to establish any new activities as a result of that. Now, I can't really speak to where the regional council is at with that process, but for example, in Rotorua, you had basically a one in, one out, or a sinking lid type rule mechanism around future pollution activities. And I can recall I was involved with a number of clients who, were looking to set up and just, as a matter of fact, could not because of these rules. Now, I suppose as to what has been done, I'm conscious that, we are a territorial authority and not the regional council, so I probably wouldn't go too far into talking about what the regional council has been doing in that space, but I can say the Tauranga City Council, people like myself and others, and Barbara and Christine, have been quite heavily involved in, I guess, finding a multi-agency and a collaborative way to try and deal with these issues. It's regrettable to say, and I don't mean to dismiss it in any way, it is a complicated matter with overlapping jurisdictional issues. But I guess that is part of why we're recommending Mr Beverley take this step, is to really explore and understand what the best options are to try and find some, I guess, pathways or resolutions to these issues.
Thanks very much, Nick. Deputy Mayor Salisbury, followed by Councillor Morris, followed by Councillors Arbery and Clout.
Thank you. I just have a question. I'm not even sure really who it's to, but and I understand that it's complex and there's a lot of work to be done that isn't going to happen fast. But I just wonder if anyone has had conversations with the port and with the businesses to see, rather than it just being a purely regulatory approach, have we also had the conversations to see if there's some voluntary things that could be done now?
My awareness of that is probably a bit limited. I might just see if anyone else has any information in that regard.
Not aware of a lot, but those conversations would likely be the regional council, and we do know that they are engaging with businesses in terms of breaches or otherwise, and plans in terms of how they manage air pollution. So that certainly sits in their camp, and we could ask the regional council for a summary of those conversations if you wanted to do that. It's something we could ask, or we could even ask them to perhaps come and present to council, but it sits in their jurisdiction really.
Thank you, Christine. Sarah, would you like to come and, do you feel, yes please, that'd be great. If you wouldn't mind, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Perhaps if I can just, through the chair, just make a comment too. So the purpose of this report is to help inform councillors of the legal framework that the various organisations are operating within. And as much as we would like to flick a switch and change this, there is current law and regulation that determines the powers and the ability to affect change. And so today really is the starting point to inform the legal framework that we are currently operating in and what steps we can take if we wish to affect change. So that was the starting point. And I think we need to start there. We know where we'd like to go, but we need to understand, if you like, the rules that we are operating within. Now, we may get to the point quite quickly that we realise that the rules and the law that we're operating in will not bring effect to the change that we want in any manner and at the pace that some would desire. That then would require some different action. So,
Sarah, thank you. For those that don't know Sarah, and I'm sure most people here do, Sarah Amundsen, General Manager of Regulatory at BOP Regional Council. Thanks for being here, Sarah, today.
There's been quite a few questions around the table that you would probably like some direct answers from me from. I'll just firstly start with have conversations been happening with industry? Yes, they have. And last week we had a network meeting with all industrial sites in the Mount area just to talk about a lot of the concerns that you've heard from Emma and Joel here today, and also about the things that Regional Council and the City Council have got underway. We have to be quite mindful that as a regulatory authority, this is a regulatory problem that we have to manage, and for any voluntary mechanisms that there might be in place that industry want to take part of, we've asked priority one to step in and start having those discussions, because as the regulatory authority, that's not part of something that we will be involved in, but it's really important that industries are talking together about their solutions and being really mindful of the community's concerns and what they are telling us now.
Thanks, Sarah. Can I just a question of clarification? Yeah. What role is Priority One playing exactly?
Priority One will be talking to all the major businesses in the area just about the problems that are being faced, and to look at what potential solutions that are outside of a regulatory framework might exist. Yep.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure where we were at, but I think it was Steve, Kelvin, Jaco, maybe the other way around, then Heidi and Larry.
Thank you. Question to Tauranga City Council staff. Obviously, the Territorial Authority and the Regional Council have a limited set of powers as prescribed under law. Is there the opportunity to partner with central government with this piece of work without slowing it down? Because I'm conscious and mindful that I think we actually will need an intervention from central government because our powers are limited. Is there a way of bringing them into this soon and keeping them in lockstep with us all the way through the process?
Well, I think there is that opportunity. We just need to work through which particular department or departments of central government have an interest in this, and there are a number that do, obviously, so I don't think there's any harm, but
look, I think it goes without saying that we would have to, as part of this, factor in central government and liaise with them. Certainly, I understand it's already been happening quite extensively, not only from a regulatory point of view, but also in terms of ministerial inquiries, and I believe visits may have taken place. I'm not 100% sure. But certainly, I think it's probably been viewed as a joint exercise, a scoping one between ourselves and the Regional Council. I would suggest it's probably best to keep it there, to keep it moving, because of course, as you said, Councillor, it could potentially slow it down, but certainly it would be a core part of this to understand what central government brings to the table, not only in a legislative way, but also in a facilitative manner as well, if I can put it that way, if that answers your question.
Thanks very much. Kelvin.
Thank you, Mitembi. Tēnā koutou katoa. I've just got two questions. The first question, Nick, relates to the wording of our recommendation because it basically talks about potential pathways to achieve managed retreat of heavy industry. If we go ahead with this wording, does this commit council right now to a managed retreat strategy, or are we only looking at the possibilities, the pathways that could lead to that? Because if we are making a firm decision today about a managed retreat, that has massive implications. So can you just explain, please? And then I've got a second question.
Yes, it is just looking at the pathways because, again, you want to make sure that you understand your legislative frameworks and areas where you would be getting your best value or results to explore this. So it isn't making any commitment. In fact, I anticipate that you know, understanding how any decision would be made would be a core part of what this report will have to do.
Thank you. And my second question, in terms of the scoping report, I assume that it will cover the four well-beings: social, cultural, environmental and economic. Is that something that we need to make very clear? Because we've got effectively four well-beings that we have to balance off against each other. So will that be part of the scoping report?
Yes, I believe Sarah's nodding there. It absolutely will be part of it. I recognise, of course, as well that the RMA does loom large in this matter, but of course the Local Government Act and the four well-beings govern everything we do, and they will have to be part of the considerations, yes.
Thank you, Kelvin. Yako.
Happy to second your motion, or... Ah, right, okay, never mind. In terms of number of breaches, number of fines and given out over the last, say, 10 years, can you just talk a little bit to that?
I can't provide you the precise number of fines or prosecutions in the last 10 years, but we have been taking action every time that there has been an exceedance or a breach of the rules. The difficulty particularly that Joel and Whareroa community are experiencing is, and this is why we need MFE at the table. MFE set the limits for what air quality discharges can go into the air, and that's the basis for our consents and the conditions that we apply in our consents. And we have breaches and we can take action, we can abate, we can infringe and we can prosecute. But some of what Whareroa are experiencing is a lower level of discharges that are constant. So our rules are set here, they're experiencing something here, and that's not, we don't have the framework at the moment to deal with that, which is why MFE are really important at the table in terms of setting rules that relate to human health and setting rules that we can regulate for. So haven't had an exceedance at the marae for PM10 since 2018, late 2018, which is great news, but that doesn't mean that they don't still experience dust and odour issues of concern.
So just a supplementary to Yako's, has Regional tested this? Have you sought a revision with MFE of the levels? So you're measuring that constancy that you talk about?
MFE are currently reviewing their national standards for air quality, which has been a really important process for us to engage in, as it has been for the marae community as well. We've also looking to health for some direction on.
And the DHB, I heard people talking about priority one. Priority one is our EDA. Yeah, if my son's ill, I'm not calling priority one. I'm calling the DHB. Can someone explain to me what I'm missing here? Because our job as a council is to look after our people. Everything else is secondary. So can someone explain to me why I haven't heard DHB, MOH, and why the recommendation is so narrow and has no sense of immediacy about it?
I suppose the DHB or Toiti Ora have been quite closely involved in this. I would frame it from my attendance at various multi-agency workshops as quite strong advocates for this issue. The The point Sarah touched on before about the regulatory tools at our disposal is perhaps where there's a gap, if you want to look at it that way. I certainly know that, sorry, I missed the name, Joel, before, but the doctor that's been, Jim Miller, that's right, has been very, I guess, actively participating over, or the sort of 18 months that I've been involved in some of these discussions. I'm not sure if they have powers at their disposal. I would assume not. I haven't looked at it. I know that certainly from Tauranga City Council's point of view, I'm not aware that we have a lever to pull that would lead to that immediate sort of action that I think you're mentioning. I suppose that's the nature of, I guess, the issue that we face, is that we may struggle to have those tools to take immediate action, at least in a regulatory capacity. Whether there's a non-regulatory way to try and bring some pressure to bear or something else, I suppose that's the only thing that springs to mind.
Supplementary observation would be, and it's an important point, we're not the MSD, but we have put together a Merrill task force on homelessness, because we recognise our responsibilities to our community and the need for us to be proactive in pushing people to exercise their duties of care towards our citizens. I mean, my feeling at the moment is the recommendation is far too narrow.
Thank you. Heidi, followed by Larry.
A couple of things. One is one of the slides that we were going to discuss here was the idea of a plan change within the scope of this that would stop any more industries coming into that area. What might that look like, and is that a possibility, and does that come within the scope of what we're talking about here, an urgent plan change to stop more heavy industry?
Christine, did you want, well, I'm happy to answer though.
Andy's just sent me a reply on exactly this issue. So do you want to respond to it, Andy, from a technical perspective? Do you want to start and then we'll go from there?
Sure. Look, I think that would be absolutely front and centre of what we'd be looking to investigate through this recommendation in this report. The nature of the RMA is quite important here, because it's ultimately a piece of legislation that has a number of requirements, including looking at things like impacts on human health. And I'd say that's a bottom line within the RMA, even more so perhaps in the natural environment, if you can imagine. You know, so that is part and parcel of it and fundamental to the RMA. Nonetheless, there is a process that we would have to go through. There are some, I guess, tools around urgency, but I believe that I guess is something that you want to do right and in accordance with the usual RMA practices. And of course, I'm thinking here of the city plan review, which is underway, which I think Andy can probably pick up in a second on a bit more about that. But I would think, again, this is something that Paul Beverley would be looking at, along with Mitchell Dash, the planning consultancy that I mentioned, as to how that would best fit within the RMA and whether that would actually achieve the, I guess, the result that the Marae community in particular are looking for. But absolutely, I don't want to jump ahead and for, I guess, get ahead of myself and impact on what Mr Beverley and Mitchell Dash will be doing, but I think that will be absolutely part and parcel of what they will look at.
Supplementary? In terms of scope of the area, we're talking at the moment of this area around Totara Street. But the whole Mount area, we're in this airshed that has a sinking lid. If we lose the ones on this side, that lid gets a little bit larger for the ones on the other side of the road. So I think I'm just wondering about the scope here, and if we're looking at the heavy industry that is affecting all our communities, should we not be looking at the heavy industry across that whole area?
I suppose, as I said at the introduction to my report, this has come from a particular origin in the Tauranga Moana Advisory Group. The wider, I guess, Mount zoning and interface with industrial and residential will certainly be part of any city plan review, because it would have to be. It's a city-wide document about the rules that regulate environmental impacts. Whether we wanted, as I said, to go further and whether that formed part of this particular study, I suppose is a wider discussion point. I would suggest that it probably is quite a large task and would need to be, I guess, suitably scoped out and resourced to make sure it was covering things, but it could also potentially form part of the city plan. And probably at this point, I'd be quite keen to hear from Andy Mead in particular, or Christine, if they had any extra things to input on that particular suggestion.
Start off, and then I'll hand over to Andy. So you recall when we brought the city plan, project plan to you, we talked about that there will be a series of particular areas of focus that need to be addressed, some pieces of technical work. So this could be absolutely the port and the port area, and that broader industrial zone is always one of the matters that's on the list that we review each city plan, including buffer, reverse sensitivity, light, noise, etc. So that's part of that. The question is around the air part of that. Is that something that a city plan can address? And it really relates to the underlying land use. So I'll ask Andy to speak to that. The other thing that we need to remember is if we're making any changes, we need to have a really robust Section 32, and you can expect through any city plan process where you're looking in some way to take away what is currently an existing use right and which would change or be diminished through a plan change, which is effectively what we would be suggesting if you went down this track, that the commercial interests in that area will take an active interest and proactive approach to retain their existing rights. So we're going to have comprehensive and quality assessment for a Section 32 to be able to work through the RMA process and have the plan change provisions as you want them at the end of the day. So that it's not a quick fix process when you were looking at matters of this scale and this significance, but I'll ask Andy perhaps to talk a bit more.
Thanks, Christine. Andy, thank you.
Thank you. So through the chair, so air discharge largely sits with the regional council, but notwithstanding that, we need to implement the national planning standards through our next plan review. The natural planning standards have a suite of different zones we need to apply across our city. Some of those zonings in terms of industrial and commercial development have I guess, different types of activities that would be expected with them. So heavier industrial zones, port zones, or light industrial zones or mixed use type zones. So in the future, rather than having just one industrial zone across the mount, we could consider having multiple different zones in different areas to better manage effects of development. And within that, we could have and consider potentially particular types of activities that we consider to be or not to be appropriate. Again, as Christine has mentioned, we do need to do that thoroughly, and we do need to put up a very strong rationale for what we consider to be the right outcome, and that is potentially to be tested by other interests and commercial interests. I do also wish to mention that we are coming towards the end of our Te Papa spatial planning, and we will be bringing some reports to you in the future about how we move on from that, and moving on to the area more broadly around Mount Maunganui and undertaking spatial planning there in the Mount Maunganui and Arataki areas is certainly something that's on our agenda. We do need to scope that work up, and potentially this could form part of that project. Probably a key issue that we have in that part of town that we haven't faced down the Te Papa Peninsula.
Thanks very much, Andy. Much appreciated. Larry.
Yeah, thanks. Kia ora, everybody. I've just been scrolling through the Health Act to try and find the powers for the air quality. It doesn't seem to be listed there separately. But the Chief Medical Officer, as I understood it, had power to intervene if he knew people were being made sick from such things. Have we investigated that fully, not with a doctor, but with the Chief Medical Officer for the area? If we've been able to shut down the whole country with a pandemic, surely if we know people are getting sick, there must be some powers there, surely. So,
it's certainly been part of discussions. The Health Act is a 1956 Act, but there are specific roles, including various agencies, but including Ministry of Health, I don't recall when it was raised there was any, I guess, indication at the meetings that that was an option that they were considering using. I would say it's certainly secondary to the very particular rules that are in place under the RMA and under the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality, whereas the Health Act powers are quite general in their application. So it's things like, for example, mould in houses or this type of thing, right? But you've got a very specific tool designed around air quality standards that filters through, and it has, doesn't filter through it, it has its home in the RMA. As Sarah said, that's currently under review with specific reference to some of these pollutants that Joel has put up, PM10, PM2.5, which is particulate matter sizes on very small scale. I'm no scientist. Other sort of air pollutants as well, regulated by that. So I would think, if I were, I can't really put words in their mouth as to what they would do, but I would say to you that that tool is the tool that is designed by central government to actually regulate these types of issues. The Health Act is probably quite a secondary and generalised set of legislation relative to this particular issue.
I just recall with the air quality coming out of the palm kernel sheds over there in, by the aerodrome, that was one of the things that was referred to was the medical officer. But I just, would the recommendations enable you, or do we need to change them so that we do expand it to investigate the powers under, whatever the health issues are? Because we're not going to be able to do anything immediately to shut anything down, but if people are continually getting sick, that's where we could look.
Well, I suppose the scope is very broadly stated as it's to explore options for, again, it's bounded geographically by Totara and Hewlett's Road, but it's quite a broadly stated set of objectives. I suppose it's also finding out the areas that, as I said before, would offer the best pathways to explore this. So that could include that, absolutely. And I think we're better to have a very broadly stated scope, because I'm conscious that that scope will be informed by the residents themselves when Paul and the planner come and talk to you. So again, I believe it's probably broadly stated. It could be much broader, but I think we get into that conversation that Christine and Andy have just spoken about as to how that fits in with the wider city plan review.
Just a final question. With the recommendations that were up there from the presentation from Joel and Emma, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. I think we've got to move on this, but we won't solve it all today. And the recommendation today is not going to have to be covering everything, because we are just starting some steps. But would it be of value for some of those things that were in that recommendation there to get included today, so we're starting to move in that direction? I'd like to ask that question. Seemed like the Chief Executive thought we could add some things in. We don't need to add them all in necessarily, unless it's really going to help us move on, because this will come back again and we'll modify and go ahead. But I'd be happy if to move an amendment, or to let the chairman, just make a modification, if you would, Mayor Temby.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah, if I could just add that this is one part of a large piece of work that we've got underway with Tauranga City and with other agencies, and DHB and Toitū are a really critical part of that. What we're hoping to do in the next 8 weeks is to come to you and invite you to a working party that will involve the community, it will involve iwi, it will involve all of the relevant agencies, and you'll see in the first, in Tauranga Moana Advisory Group's recommendation, they talked about an action plan, and that's key. So the options for managed retreat is one part of that story, but there's a lot more that needs to be done, and we would like to have everybody around the table working together on that, and I think that's a real key to getting, the one step and keep going on that journey. So we'll be coming back to you asking for representatives to sit on that working party.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Heidi.
I'm just going back to the scope here, because the plan changes. My daughter is 10, and I imagine, you guys sitting over there are thinking about your kids and your mokopuna who might be, 5. 5 years is a long time in the age of the child. Mine goes to a Manu school. My son goes to Mount College. I live in the shed of the airshed, the polluted airshed. So I'm just wondering about the scope here in terms of it just being in that small area, and what are there, say, 5, how can we make this, what other big polluters are in there that we could add into the scope? Is it like the 10 big other polluters that come within that? So how do we make the scope relevant for change in the short term on the basis of what we're doing here rather than waiting for plan changes?
I actually think this is this process, I think, will be much better informed once we get the report back from Paul Beverley. And then this really is the first step. It's a commitment by our council to enter into a joint multi-agency process that will, in my view, be all-encompassing, but really this is the first step. I think each report that comes back will provide further opportunities for this to grow and encompass all that we need to achieve. But I guess this is the first step. Just speaking about multi-agency, when we got together with the Regional Council pre-COVID lockdown, we talked about bringing a report to the councils in a joint fashion. At that point, we also talked about medical research and whether or not a piece of medical research had ever been done in the Mount or in Whareroa, and we weren't aware of any research. And so one of our action points from that meeting was to engage the DHB or Ministry of Health to understand whether or not that had actually occurred, and if not, why not, and what could we do to establish it. So I guess this is really the first step. I mean, we can put as much detail into the scope now as possible that we want, but the reality is I think Paul Beverley's report in 6 weeks or so, whenever he finishes it, will inform the next steps and strands of work.
Tina, followed by John.
I just have a quick question just around small steps, I guess, that can be done straight away. I had heard, it's on page 12 and item 20, we're talking about the tank farm, which was, I think, one of the things that kind of stirred up some of the conversation right now. But I had heard that they were deciding to put it somewhere else because of this. Can anyone confirm that?
No, I can't confirm that. We do, both councils have a consent application in at the moment. The Regional Council have made a decision on notification on that. The District Council, the City Council, we've got the application on hold, waiting for more information. Haven't formally heard that it's going somewhere else, but we can follow up.
Thank you, John.
Goes back to something, an approach suggested in the meeting this morning of Finance, Audit and Risk. I'd like to see the motion explicit in terms of our expectations and our decision. So I'd like to move an amendment along the lines that this council no, but I'm foreshadowing this because we haven't got a motion on the table that may be adopted by the... Sorry?
Yeah, the motion as it currently stands has been moved and seconded.
Yep.
As seconder, I'm happy to entertain an amendment if you are. I don't know what it might look like.
Christine's got what I believe will be a helpful suggestion, which I think we should listen to before we do amendments. Thanks, Christine.
So just in terms of this report, it was responding to the Te Moana Advisory Group, which is looking at managed retreat, and much of the conversation today has been, well, partly about managed retreat, but partly how do you not get the existing situation worse? So in terms of any future applications, how do we deal with those? So my suggestion would be that we extend the brief for Paul Beverley to be both dealing with existing use rights, and that relates to managed retreat, and also consideration of future activities and how they may well be able to be controlled. And then picking up on the point of Councillor Hughes, it doesn't matter where in the amount area it is. It's really trying to understand what tools and pathways would be available to deal with both matters, and then when you get that back, then you can make a call about are our city plan changes the best mechanism, or are there other mechanisms that need to be dealt with? So if you'd be comfortable with that, I think that will deal with both matters that we're discussing.
Thank you.
Can we get that revised wording up? Because I do have an amendment in mind. I'm not sure that this covers it, but I'm, you know, we're
We'll just
talking.
take a couple of minutes and we'll just get that up. Thank you.
Let's see where they go with this. It's where Larry and I were going earlier in terms of the total scope. It's not a geographic scope issue, right? But if Beverly's coming back in 6 weeks, I want that in the motion, and I want us saying what Beverly's coming back with.
The other thing that it's talking about here is it's talking about pollutants, it's not talking about hazard. It's health, not hazard. And I think we want to incorporate both health and hazard.
Yeah, I think there's some work to do here. You know,
We've got to scope the scope.
So it's
we've got
not
to
the
scope this.
pollutants, it's not capturing the hazard risk of tank fires in this.
Let's see what they put up, because I still think it's too narrow.
Yeah, but in terms of geography, though, you're wanting to include the whole Mount Industrial.
I think she said it doesn't
Should be for the city as a whole.
This is going to be something else. This
Yeah,
piece
what
of
the hell's
work
happening
will
at,
go right over us.
what the hell's happening over at,
I think we can keep it focused to this to solve get this scope sorted and get our piece done, and then that thing just goes.
let's see what,
apply right across the
let's see what Christine comes up with. My understanding is we're going to move it in a second, but we're still asking questions. We're not debating the moment.
But it is radical, but we're still.
We have a mover in a second, but we're still asking questions, yes. And that's where I was. Yeah. It's all right, I'm just... I understand. I think we're agreeing.
Happy day.
I don't know whether I think this is being seen too narrowly. It's still being seen as a sort of RMA plan change issue. But there's a bigger issue here that I'd like to understand.
Which is why I think we're getting everyone.
Yeah, what, I suppose I'm... Yeah. It's almost getting the Beverly report in as part of the motion.
Options are available to us and anything as far as liaison.
No, it's not, is it? There's only 2 recommendations. It's in the report, but it's not on the recommendations. What I'm saying is, can we put it into the recommendation?
It does just say heavy industry, actually, that's all encompassing of pollutant and hazard. They'll explore every avenue, I imagine. I think it's of huge value having another panel to listen to this debate and our questions, because I
But
pick up the new
what are they writing here? So,
implementation of manipulation heavy
it's not, Larry, it's not the weight of the industry, it's the damage it causes human beings, it's the issue.
If we could just remuster Heidi, just so you know, I'm happy to adopt that into the substantive amendment if you are.
We're still asking questions here.
and
as long as the chair indulges us. As long as the chair indulges us.
We're like completely all involved in this one, aren't we?
This is a classic case where the staff are talking and we're talking, but not talking to each other. We'll figure it out. We're still on questions.
Harry, followed by John.
Just question, please, on the wording there that's been added. Is that going to include, because there's an aspect that's been raised in regard to the recent events in Beirut and the number of hazardous substances, chemicals and so on that are just simply stored there or planned to be stored. So does heavy industry sufficiently cover that? Because I think we do need a review, whether by Beverly or by someone else, but as quickly as possible, of how much stuff is there. And it refers, Tembi, to your role as chair of CDEM and getting that work underway to review what would happen if a major incident occurred.
Yep, and I really appreciate that, and I do understand it, and it has flashed through my mind on a number of occasions that probably the first person I'm going to call is Clinton Nordo to start that process exactly. However, I would have thought for the purposes of this meeting, the authorisation of a high-level investigation, potential pathways to achieve sub-serial A and B, would be sufficient to get this going, which would then require a term of reference or terms of reference included within which I would have thought would be all the issues that have been discussed at some detail now.
Yeah, just to clarify my question, will heavy industry cover simply the issue of hazardous
I would have
storage?
thought so.
If it does, then fine. If it doesn't,
sure. No, I appreciate your point, Larry. I would have thought so. If you want the words written in there, again, I would, if Heidi, with Heidi's permission, be happy to adopt that into the substantive resolution.
with it if we could.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Yeah, look, I know it's always difficult to, when we get into these writing things by committee. However, this is a really important topic. I'm concerned that it should be heavy and or hazardous industry. I notice a difference between A and B. B refers to high polluting, yet surely high polluting should also be an A if that's the case. And I do have an option C that I'd like to put into what you're suggesting, and I will move it once it's appropriate to move an amendment. I'm happy to foreshadow it if you want to consider adopting it. And that C would be pathways to achieve an immediate reduction in the harmful effects being experienced by the people in Whāraroa Marae. Because I think if we don't have that, we're missing the point. So my C would be, if I had a seconder, and if this was a motion on the floor, so I'm foreshadowing, to achieve an immediate reduction in the harmful impact or effects being experienced by the people of Whāraroa Marae. Because I think that's ultimately the outcome we're seeking. What we're talking about here is steps.
I'm happy to put that in. I just wonder if staff would like to comment to that.
Well, I don't think Dr. Beverley will be doing that. That's not his area of expertise. It would be a whole new strand of work that we would need to initiate, and I would imagine that ultimately this will be a strand of work in what will be a comprehensive action plan. I think perhaps to include this as an outcome, the high-level investigation to pathways, that's essentially what we're trying to achieve.
If I can clarify, it's a high-level investigation. The staff will interpret that according to the resources and capacity they have, but it makes it very clear the outcome we're trying to seek here. and it makes it in the motion, which is the thing that people go back to. What did the council say? What did people vote for? And surely, Amendment C, you know, an immediate reduction in the harmful impacts or experience of the people of Whararama Marae is what's driving this. You know, I don't see what the issue is here. It creates no burden. The chief executive interprets it in the light of understanding the conversation, in the light of the resources he have available. Yeah, please.
Seconder, but I think achieve is the word that's difficult, because we don't know what we can achieve. I think we want to pursue an immediate reduction if, but we don't know we can achieve it. We don't have the power. We want to pursue the reduction in this harm as soon as possible, but I think having the word achieve is.
But if they come back and say there's no way it can be achieved, but.
Well, it can be achieved by shifting everything out tomorrow afternoon. I think there's no doubt that everybody here in this room has a will to act with some expediency on behalf of Whararama Marae and people of the marae and the Mount generally. The reality is it's going to be a multidisciplinary group, which was made abundantly clear by a number of people, and not just us. We're just spending minutes and minutes wordsmithing something which will end up going to a multidisciplinary group based on a report that then, and only then, quite frankly, I think, can we really take action in consultation with our regional partners and other central government agencies.
Through the chair, you could ask that resolution C be that the pathways be identified as short, medium and long-term opportunities. So, because they're going to be quite different and their impact will be able to be quite different.
Okay, if you're comfortable with that, that's a good idea, which identifies low-hanging fruit immediately. That would be practical.
Good. Yep. The presenters seem more comfortable with that. Yeah. Can we?
Other than being felt, John, wouldn't you experience?
Are you happy though, John, that covers it with short, medium and long? Okay, let's keep seeing. I'm still happy to keep C in there.
Yeah, we're just talking about exactly about that, Heidi, about adopting it in the original substantive motion, which is it's just C. It's
I assist. Yeah. Could I offer? I don't think I've called him Your Worship all this term, but Mr. Mayor.
Well, let's not start now.
Just the C needs to be what John put up without the achieve immediate in there, just put, because you've got that at the top. You just need C as a reduction in harmful effects being, because that's the short, medium term, medium, long term pathways to achieve. And if you then read C, it says the reduction in harm. That's the way it would read. 'Cause
Okay, on the board, Heidi's still here, thank goodness for that. We have what is effectively the revised substantive motion, parts A, B and C. And it's B that hardens it up in terms of Christine's, I think, very practical suggestion of an immediate, a short-term and a medium and long-term initiatives.
Excuse me, would the word felt be better to be experienced? Because the people here...
Experienced, sure.
It's not just feeling,
Yep.
it's they're actually experiencing those issues. Thank you.
Being very literal, but yep, that's... All right, if there's no other discussion on that, I'm very conscious that... Are you okay with that, Heidi? Okay. Excellent work, everyone. All right, is there any further discussion on that? Heidi, sorry? Questions, discussions? Yep, debate, comment? Oh, look, I'm not big on speeches. This is critically important. I think Christine's suggestion was very practical, and as I said earlier on, this is a very, very important area, and I don't think there's anyone here on council that wouldn't be wholly supportive of doing what we're trying to do, which is fundamentally get to a point where we are working with our regional partners, particularly the Regional Council, various government agencies, and all that's going to come with this too, because it is going to be a multidisciplinary local and central government effort to make this work. And the sooner we get to that point via this thing, then we can actually do something practical.
I'd just like to thank the Whareroa, people of Whareroa Marae for the grace and stoicism that you show through this whole process, and for what you bring, and because in bringing what you have done to this table, you're actually supporting the whole of Tauranga City to become a better city. And that's what we're all trying to achieve here. And I think that this is, as somebody mentioned earlier, it's an elephant in the room, which we're all, as Tembi mentioned, the staff, Regional Council, us, we're ready. We're ready now to move forward on a better city, and we're ready now to take on our responsibilities to all our people who live within Tauranga. And I hope this is a first step to a really clear set of actions that continues on from here. Thank you.
Heidi, Larry, followed by Yako.
Thank you, Heidi. Well said. I wish we had a magic wand to just change it like this, and I'm sure you do. But I remember at the Mayor's Porphyry at Whareroa when we heard, probably we've known for a long time, but we heard firsthand some really awful examples of what was happening. And yet here we are already 8 months away, so apologies for that. But hopefully this is the beginnings of some real change for you. I know you go home to it and we don't. So I hope we remember that when we get all passionate today about trying to do something. It's real and we need to find the answers. I am still surprised that the Medical Officer of Health does not have power to intervene here when we know what's happening, but that will be explored, I'm sure, and perhaps some pressure brought there for the interim, because we know the consent conditions are far too lenient. It's obvious, but the difficult things to be changed and for us to get involved with. But I hope you do feel you've been heard today, and that we will get there one day. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Yako.
We look out over that, we see the chimney stacks there next to your marae, and just acknowledge that you've been there a long time. I think your marae was built in the 1800s, and then you've had these chimney stacks go up right next to you, which is a big mistake by the zoning rules. That was something that the council did or allowed that we shouldn't have. And we're stuck with it now, and we're trying to work towards solving that. And it's going to be hard and slow, but I just hope that whoever the appropriate ministers are actually find out about this, pay attention. I know you had, or I believe you had, Nanai visit. And when it comes to the medical people saying that you don't know whether you're getting sick or not, I think that the burden of proof is wrong. For industry to be there, they've got to prove 100% that everyone in that area is completely safe. So they've got to provide evidence that there's no harmful effects from what they're doing. They can't say you have to prove that you're getting sick. That's the wrong way around. So I'd say kia manawa nui, kia toa, kia kaha.
Thanks, Yako. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is the start of a journey. I'm pleased that we have got our regional council partners with us in this journey, because what can happen when you're dealing with multiple layers of bureaucracy is, and with complex issues, is that people can pass the buck from one agency to another. You can have the city council passing the buck to regional and then back to the city, and then everybody talks to the government, and then the government goes and says, no, it's the city, and then it's the region again. And you end up in this endless circle of dialogue with very little action. So I'm pleased that our regional partners are with us, and I note from reading their agenda that they're picking up most of the tab for the report. We're only picking up some 20-odd% of it by the looks of things, so well done and congratulations to our regional partners in that regard. It is vital, though, and I do acknowledge the comments of our staff around not slowing this down by getting central government partners involved in the writing of this report, but it is really important that we have the relevant government departments in lockstep with us all in this, because otherwise we will get into that buck passing scenario. And there's nothing, you know, if you think regional council and city council passing the buck to each other is bad, you should see government departments and how they operate. So we need to keep them in lockstep with us. It's interesting what is within our power, subject to hearings and subject to appeals to the Environment Court and the High Court. You know, a plan change, you know, we could go down that route, and it may in fact encourage or make a financial incentive for some industry to relocate. You know, subject to the hearing, of course. If the council rezoned that area high intensity residential, for example, there could be a land use incentive for industry to move out. Then of course you'd have to deal with the effects of having hazardous substances on that land as well, and the cleanup. But I think we're in a good place to move forward together. We have our partners in Tangata Whenua and Regional Council, and let's go and make sure that central government listen. And when Minister Mahuta is in town, please tell her to come and see us as well. We'd love to see her.
Thanks, Steve. John, followed by Tina.
Yeah, I'm minded of, in my head again, Bo Pal or Aaron Brockovich or whatever you want to go with here. Look, this needs to be addressed. It's not just a Whareroa issue. It's a Aotearoa New Zealand issue. It's a world issue. We've got it here locally, and it's embarrassing. We need to focus on outcomes. This is about harm and sustainability. This is not about heavy industry. There are tools, I believe, which are available and should be being implemented and probably aren't being. There is responsibilities all over the place by people who choose to take positions of responsibility. The one thing I would urge is that we, how can I put it, test those partnerships. Right? What I know, what little I know of Marae culture is on the Paipai you speak truth. And I hope the relationships that we claim to have are genuine and deep enough so truth and honesty drives this conversation rather than an avoidance of responsibility and an allocation of blame somewhere else. It's really important that the conversations that lead to the creation of these reports are rooted in truth and evidence and honesty and a desire to achieve the outcome that it took a while to get into this motion, and that is the reduction of harm, the promotion of health.
Thank you, John. Tina.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the Whareroa whānau and just say thank you for keeping this before us, and thank you for not giving up. And I guess I just want to say we hear you and we see you, and we hope that you hear today that we want to stand with you and find a way forward together.
Tremendous. Anyone else? I think Kelvin and Bill.
Thank you. Look, I'm absolutely committed to achieving what you're wanting to achieve, particularly in the area of health and the experiences that you are having very negatively through the location of heavy industry in the Mount area. What I would say though, I think it's very important to bear in mind that when I asked about the 4 well-beings, one of those well-beings is the economy, and we are talking thousands of jobs located in the Mount industrial area. And so I just want us all to be aware of the huge ramifications that could come into play in the area of our economy if we were to actually achieve this. And I'm all for enhancing the health of our people, particularly in the Mount area. But it's not going to be an easy road, but we're taking the first step today. But we are talking thousands of jobs and huge significance to our economy. But I just wanted to, that will be an important factor, put it that way, going forward. But I really am pleased that we will be passing this today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelvin. Bill.
Let me be short and sweet. First of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you guys. And why I say that is that safety and health is number one our number one priority. But just remember, if it wasn't for you guys that have come forward and shared your experience, it wouldn't have got to this stage. That's why I thank you again for doing what you did.
Thanks, Bill. Anyone else? In that case, councillors, I will put the resolutions to you as one, A, B and C. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Any abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming in, to the people of Whanaro. We really appreciate you being here today for this important debate and discussion. And yeah, please. Kia ora. Kia ora, thank you very much. Council brings us to 10.2, the long-term plan work streams. Jeremy, are you here? No, Christine, thank you.
So the purpose of this report was to give an overview of all of the sorry, is that better? Ooh. Right, usually. The purpose of the report is to provide elected members with a schedule of all of the key work streams, not everything, but these are the key work streams that we're proposing will flow into the LTP. They come from resolutions that the Council's already passed, statutory requirements, and matters that the executive team and the senior leadership team of the organisation have identified are important to be addressed through the LTP. We've collated them and put them under headings just to cluster them in groups. So we're looking for the elected members to endorse that list, add any other matters that you think should be included that aren't, or delete. The report draws your attention to one matter which was discussed in a previous council meeting through the annual plan. It wasn't resolved on at that time, so we haven't included it, which was around economic development, and noting that the issue of economic development and a sub-regional strategy or update to the strategy is an action that is in UFTI, was signed off and approved, and we've sent you some informal information on that matter, so that's your decision as to whether you want to include anything else. Happy to speak to, I don't intend to go through all of the matters, but happy to answer any specific questions.
Thanks very much, Christine. Councillors, any questions? Sir Arbery, followed by Deputy Mayor Salisbury.
Yeah, just a reminder for my memory, we in the open workshop we discussed one item that seemed to be missing off that list. Was that the economic development?
We did talk both about economic development, but also a bulk fund for community funding, and we have included that because there seemed to be general agreement around the table. That's included on page 51 of this agenda as LOS 9, which was the concept of a bulk fund for community and social organisations, for want of a better word, and that through the LTP you would decide if you wanted such a bulk fund, what the scale of it was, and give indication about the assessment framework or the allocation framework that you'd want to have included.
Thank you, Christine. Tina.
Is it possible to add something? I just wonder if it would be possible to explore options to remediate wharves in the CBD and Salisbury Wharf just as a priority in this LTP.
So through, there's an action in here around the city centre plan. So on page 48 of your agenda, under the red section S14, there's an action in there about develop a city plan which includes a waterfront master plan, and that would deal with the wharves that are in the CBD area. If you're looking for something else, if you're looking around wharves as a relation to a transportation mode, then that would logically fall out of the transport system plan. And that sits in here as a separate work stream and will come to you as a work stream with a series of projects, and they'll be workshopped with you.
If I can just add too, there is also work on Fisherman's Wharf, remedial works happening this year.
You, Heidi.
I just wondered how we might go about progressing the idea of an inter-regional train station in Tauranga in the next LTP. How might that discussion be had?
My understanding is the Regional Council is looking at inter-regional rail. It hasn't got yet to a point where there is a business case on that. So that would flow from the Regional Land Transport Plan and would be a discussion. You can always add in subsequent years through an annual plan if you want to add a project in, but at the moment it's not coming through as a priority project. It isn't far enough advanced.
Thanks, Heidi. Christine, John.
Two questions, or possibly one in the supplementary. In paragraph 11 of the report, it makes reference, and this is around the ED issue. It should be noted that the UFTI final report approved by Council on 1 July 2020 includes an action to, quote, update sub-regional economic development agency and implement. Is that an error? Should that in fact be strategy?
It is an error, it should be strategy.
I would like to update the agency, but so... My supplementary question is, do we have a copy of the brief, detailed I'm sure, and scope that that agency is acting to it, given the last sentence of that paragraph says they intend to commence this in the near future? Is there a copy available to us of the brief and scope of the work that's being done?
So there isn't, as far as I'm aware, when I say it intends to commence, that includes the planning of it, which would include the scope, etc. So we're certainly in connection with Priority 1, and as that gets developed, they'll report back, and we have had a conversation about them coming and presenting to Council around that work. So just trying.
So my second question, so I had a supplementary to my first, my second question is, what opportunity will we have as a council to input into that, or will they just be simply reporting to us what they're doing? And my understanding, of course, of smart growth is smart growth doesn't operate independently of the partners, and unless the partners all sign up to something, it don't happen.
So it is sitting as a smart growth action. Priority 1 do sit around the table at the senior managers group, and so things would flow through there and logically would come through this respective councils in no different way than all of the other actions, whether they be TSP or Te Papa, would all flow through the respective councils. So, and this is a sub-regional project in the same way that TSP is, and so I would assume it would be managed the same way. There's nothing to indicate it wouldn't be.
Thank you.
Larry, followed by Heidi.
Just quickly on the wharves, Paul, I think we heard at Dive Crescent Governance that work was also going to be happening on the Deputy Mayor's wharf. Is that correct?
Think what that was for a second, but yes. Yes, there is. And there's work being undertaken in terms of like immediate work. And then, as Christine said, particularly with the wharves down here, we're looking at that longer term strategic piece before we do any of like more substantive work. But yes, in Salisbury as well.
I'll just foreshadow that I'd be happy to move, when all the questions are finished, all the recommendations with the exception of the economic development one, which I think is covered by Ufti.
Thank you very much for that foreshadowing. Any other questions?
I just have a question around youth, specifically around the presentation we had from the group and our youth advisory board, and whether this is a particular area or stream that we want to be looking at, or where that sits, or should we make that into some provision for youth in this somewhere?
Sorry, I didn't attend that meeting. So is the issue in relation to investments of council that relate to youth, or is it about engaging the youth in the LTP process?
It's more about provision, really, of what, I guess, a study or what it is that our youth need to feel like they're part of this city. I feel like there's a gap, and I'm just kind of opening it. I don't know how this might sit, but we're not catering very well for youth right now, and how do we look at that in the LTP, and how would what would be involved around solutions for them specifically?
Look, I think that might be something that we can cover in the assessment of the investment in our community development area. So whether it's youth, whether it's aged, whether it's disabled, all of those areas will be canvassed through the LTP, and we'll be able to consider our level of investment in each of those areas.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Marty and Heidi. Any other questions, councillors? That being the case, we have really just the endorsement of the attached long-term plan. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Sorry, big pardon.
I'm happy to second.
Sorry, I thought we'd...
Moving and...
Right, sorry, I beg your pardon. And Councillor Arbery, you're seconding? Larry, would you like to speak to this?
I do like your efficiency, though. We can move along quickly. I won't speak long, but I've been through it all, and I'm really comfortable everything's been captured that we've been dealing with through briefings and so on. I appreciate all the work the staff's done so far to get there, and we're on a big journey with an LTP with some really big issues in there that need to be addressed as we go forward. So I'm happy. I think the issue with youth is important, but it's something we can address almost at any time by including them more often, as was perhaps the suggestion when they were here, just to have them come and sit with us and present to us more often. The problem with an LTP is that they disappear, and you're always starting with new youth. It's been a problem for 20 years where we've all angst about not having enough youth involvement and input. In the ED space, I believe that recommendations with Ufti will be adequate for what's been raised, and of course Councillor Robson sits at the Smart Growth table, so we'll be able to monitor it together and ensure that his issues are satisfactorily addressed. I commend it to our colleague.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, we spent quite some time discussing this in the open workshop and unpacking different parts of it. And one thing that did come up was all the support we give to various groups. At what point do we do a review of all that support? Because it all adds up to be quite a significant figure. So I'd expect that we would do that, and maybe it would be under that level of service 1, that activity areas, plans and resourcing. because it's not just economic development, we also give money to a lot of other agencies as well, so yeah, I think that's probably the logical place for it. But other than that, I think I'm happy with the broad work streams as outlined, and think it should land us in a good place. It's a good process.
Anyone else? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, look, I appreciate there's been reference made to workshops around this topic, and I appreciate staff picking up the ED issue and making reference to it in this report. My memory is the withdrawal of the amendment was done on the basis of assurance that this would in fact be addressed somewhere. I have to say that my presence alone, as much as I wish it to be, doesn't give me confidence that the work by P1 will be as deep or as far-reaching as I believe it needs to be. It's a bit of a case of who checks the checkers, which is an English translation of a Latin phrase that those of you who taught Latin or learnt Latin will know. That being said, I'd like to move an amendment, please, just to test. So the amendment would be that we add in a work stream that involves a review of the Tauranga economic development ecosystem, including funding provided to economic development agencies and other organisations, and no EG, because I think there are other organisations in that space, and saying priority one I think narrows people's understanding of economic development. If I have a seconder, I'll speak to it. If I don't, we move on. In which case I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Morris. The issue here is just the broad issue. I think that to a certain extent, and we've seen it in a number of conversations, economic development is pervasive. It is one of the well-beings, but it weaves into the others and is traded off against them. That issue was raised by Councillor Clout earlier. I'm disappointed that the recent results pointing out that this region has the worst CO2 numbers of any region in the country, in terms of we're going backwards where most other regions are going forwards, albeit not fast enough to meet anyone's targets, have not been picked up by our EDA. How can this be? Or is our EDA currently wedded to an old-fashioned growth model which doesn't recognise the interrelationship, indeed the foundational component that environment plays in economic development? So I'm not 100% convinced that the task will be completed as it should be by a council that's just recently committed $400,000 to an ISAB. And I would just ask us to pause and consider the interrelatedness of these issues, and recognise by voting for this amendment that we need to make sure that we understand as a council how the economic development ecosystem is working, and we need to make sure we review its workings in relation to everything else we do, and not under some narrow, traditional, and I would say now dying model. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Bulldog.
Look, if I'm listening to the mover of the amendment, pretty much the sole reason for this amendment is because P1 may not be addressing CO2 emissions, when we've also put into the annual plan, but also it'll be flowing through into the LTP, is that we are addressing those issues through the setting up of a independent sustainability council. But I wonder if he's missing the point. If our CO2 emissions are higher than other average cities, when we host the country's biggest port, which involves a hell of a lot of traffic, hell of a lot of freight coming in, which may well be skewing it, it's a bit hard to land that all on P1 as a reason. Look, that can still be looked at within the UFTI framework, and we can see those issues addressed. But I don't see, for us to launch into this ourselves in parallel with what's going on in the work of UFLI just sends in completely the wrong message, and also adds further, duplicates the whole thing. Please, let's just get on with the things that are in front of us.
Thank you. Councillor Cloud.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Robson, I'll be voting against this amendment. We did a very substantial review of our economic development investment about 3 years ago, I think it was, with Ross Hudson. So we've kind of already done that. And, personally, I think Priority One do a very good job in the mandate that we've given them, or they've got from ourselves and also their many members. So I'm pretty happy with the way they're operating, so I don't see the need for this review. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Heidi.
I'm just wondering whether this, within the context of Priority One, whether we can have some outcomes-based parts to add to what it is that they're doing that enables us to meet our needs, rather than duplicating or possibly duplicating when we've got an economic development agency that we could add some. If it's outcomes that we're missing here, that we could do that instead through the framework, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we could advance. Yeah.
Thank you, Heidi. Anyone else? I won't be supporting this at all. I think Priority One do a stunning job, actually. Formed by business, one of the most unusual structures in the country, if not the most. It's a collaboration and a partnership between local government and business, and I think the way that it's treated in these forums by Councillor Robson is entirely unnecessary. I think they do a very good job. They are, they are deeply concerned about a range of things that seems to be neglected in his commentary, and I worry about that. I wonder why that is, and sustainability is one of those where they've got a real interest in it. In fact, they've just done some funding towards Mr. Crowther's salary. So, I will certainly be opposing this amendment. Is there anybody else that wanted to speak to the amendment? Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, at the risk of making this bigger than it needs to be, we did talk about this in the chambers, and there was agreement that we would look at the space, and I think it's logical to review all your activities and how much you're investing in each area during an LTP. I think that's part of the process. I will be voting against it, but I think there was agreement in here that we do need to review all our investments, which I think we'll do under that LOS 1. So if we don't do that during the LTP, then I would support Councillor Robson with a resolution down the line, but at the moment I don't think that's necessary.
Thank you. Anyone else? If I could put the amendment to you, which is a review of the Tauranga Economic Development Ecosystem. All those in favour, please say aye. So can I see your hands up, please? So 1, 2. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, myself 8. Any abstentions? I don't think so. Thank you very much. So that is lost, which then takes us back to the substantive motion, which is to endorse the attached long-term plan list of work streams, etc. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. I wonder if we could have a 5-minute break, or maybe even a 10-minute break. Is that okay? 10 minutes? Time by is, say, 5 past. If we could regroup at 15 past, please, that would be great. Thank you.
So we're looking at the Local Government New Zealand 2020 remits and rule change. Coral, you going to come speak to us?
Remembering we are, I guess, one of 72 local authorities as well, so it's just
Yes.
we don't control everything.
So there's an LGNZ are having their AGM next week. We get a number of votes based on how much our subscription there is, and you get so many delegates that can go down. So you have a presiding delegate, which will be the Deputy Mayor, and apparently she gets to have the control of the electronic voting keyboard, which is programmed with the number of votes that the council's entitled to, and the votes are again based on your amount of subscription that you pay. So we get 5. And you can have you've got 2 alternatives that have been registered, which is good because if Tina, as a councillor, if the Deputy Mayor has to leave the room for whatever reason, they can vote. So that's Councillor Avery and Councillor Clouch. You can, is my understanding, I'll leave you to debate that. So at the moment, on page 53, there's the recommendations for those 11 remits, and on page 100, we've got the actual description of the remit and whether to support or not. There were 3 remits that Tauranga City Council supported to get through the sort of selection process, and those were housing affordability, the GST on rates, and water bottling. So sort of by definition, you really should be supporting that because you've already sort of done that. And the only one that we didn't put a recommendation through was about the local government electoral cycle. And I noticed that some other councils have said, had a staff recommendation to support it. And we've just said really it's a political decision for you. That's about the 4-year term. So really it's, just an indication of whether you agree with those staff recommendations. Hopefully the management comments were reasonably clear.
Thank you, Coral. Do we have any questions? Jaco.
Sorry, I was going to say I'm happy to recommend a support for every box from 1 through to 11.
Thanks. Okay. So do we have any questions of Coral? No?
What does a vote cost? Like when you said subscriptions for the number of votes, like what do we throw in?
We throw in about $75,000 a year to LGNZ. It's based on your population of your district.
Yes, Calvin.
So I definitely support Councillor Arbery moving this, but we should put a recommendation in for item number 6, which is the local government electoral cycle, and I would be happy to support that. So in other words, it'd be going from 3 years to 4 years. But in that table it says no recommendation. That's all. Yeah, in the table on page 102. So just to clarify that we are supporting, or I recommend that we support that. Thank you.
Okay.
There's also, excuse me, Madam Chair, there is a change to the rule about the presidential term going from 3 terms to 2, limiting that. So that's also up for discussion. I don't know that, sorry.
Steve.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Well, no, to you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if we could take 6 separately. Thank you.
We can do that. So if there are no other questions, does the mover want to speak to this, or do we just want to move and vote on them all apart from 6 as a group, or do we want to take them all separately?
I think all together other than 6, and I do just want to note that the remit says that the local government electoral cycle be extended from 3 to 4 years. So that is what is supported there. So unless people want to argue against that, I don't think we need to take it apart.
Does anyone have any opposing view to it being 4 years?
Yes.
Okay, so can I just move 1 to 11 excluding 6? Oh, can I put to the vote or 1 to 11 excluding 6? All those in favour?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Against? Abstentions? That's carried. Oh, forgot about 6. Okay. Do we want to talk to 6? Does anyone want to speak to that? Steve?
Madam Chair, if I may speak to it, if this shouldn't be something that is endorsed by a council without consultation with its community. This is, advocating a position on the electoral cycle, and it would be inappropriate to do that without going to the community. It would be appropriate when we are talking about representation reviews and voting systems, because we should widely consult on some of those, particularly if you're changing from FPP to STV and then not consulting with the community on it. I think we learned that lesson. So that would be the time to do it, and a clever council would have a remit to LGNZ around the same time so that the other councils can consult on it within that time in the electoral cycle. I know last time in New Zealand that a 4-year term for Parliament was proposed. There was a referendum, I think in 1987 or 1990, 87-90. It was turned down by the public by a massive majority, I understand. The New Zealand public like to keep their politicians on a short leash, and whilst some members may think that 4 years is not enough or 3 years is not enough, I think 3 years is too long, to be honest.
Heidi?
I'd like to support it going to 4 years. I feel like I think that we are in an incredibly and increasingly complex environment. There's a lot goes on, and within that 4 years, we spend the first year, the staff have to just keep re-educating new councillors all the time. We sort of have a year when we're doing that, and then that would give us 3 years to embed some decisions. I think the stability around that would be the stability and the cost savings, and the the ability of the council staff to be able to just get on and get stuff done, I think would be really helpful. I'm going to be supporting it.
John?
Yeah, I won't be supporting it. Recent public feedback from a meeting, some people at the meeting last night suggested they thought the term should be around 12 months, based on their recent experiences. In all seriousness, Councillor Morris makes a very good point, but to me it's more important than that. I think it requires a more sophisticated approach. I would favour 4 years if half our council was elected every 2 years, because then you get the continuity but also the refresh. The worry about 4 years, the way we currently run it, the approach is too blunt. If the community makes a mistake, and apparently that has been known in an election, because the nature of elections is such that no one actually checks what the politicians are saying. As Warwick Lamp reminds us every time we stand, you can write what you like, there's no test for truth. If the electorate makes a mistake, and that's what people are scared of, I believe, that's why people don't like the idea. New Zealand, and let's talk national politics to a point, eventually wound up changing our political system because giving a block of people the power almost unfettered for 3 years became a disaster for this country late last century, with social ramifications that we're dealing with as a council today, with our homelessness, our increasing inequality, and whatever. So people in New Zealand have learned that you need a more sophisticated approach to electing your leaders, and you need to be able to hold them to account. The point that Councillor Hughes makes is absolutely valid, that by the time you've got up to speed in an increasingly complex council, you're already campaigning to be re-elected. So the idea of an individual member having a 4-year period, I think, makes sense, but the idea of moving to 4-year terms doesn't. This is more complex than it first appears. I cannot support us having a position on it without taking that complex issue to our community.
Calvin.
Yeah, I've got some sympathy with Councillor Robson, and I quite like his idea about having that sort of half and half every 2 years. I think
Clarification, that idea is not mine. It came from a very experienced and intelligent and articulate member of our staff.
Well, I'll take my head off to that person. But it certainly makes sense, and I think TECT do something similar where they have half their trustees up for election at any one time, and I think it provides a bit of continuity. But I mean, clearly, this 4-year cycle for local government would only really make sense if we also mirrored it with central government, and I mean that's just unlikely to happen. But given that as it may, I'm still quite keen to put forward this 4-year cycle, and if nothing else, it'll engender some discussion and debate on the central government issue as well, I would expect. Thank you.
Larry.
Yeah, likewise, I think it makes sense when you have central government elections here, and then 2 years local government, and then central government at 4. It should be a mid-term election for local government. It's used overseas widely. But before we go on too long with the debate, let's remember that very few of these ever make it through. And if it did, if central government did actually take notice of this particular remit, I'm sure they would go to a referendum, as they did, as Councillor Morris pointed out, and our residents here would get an opportunity to have their say, because it would be a massive change of our unwritten constitution if we did change that. So, but I support the idea, and we do still have a representative democracy where we do make decisions occasionally representing our community. So,
Okay. So I will put 6 to us. The local government electoral cycle be extended from 3 to 4 years. All those in favour say aye. 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 Okay, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Against? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Yes, it will be supported. So we have a change to the order of business, I believe. Now, do we need to move that? We move it out of...
So I'll speak to this. So in the confidential section of the agenda, we have a report on the economic stimulus investment that was to be held in confidential until an announcement was made. When the event agenda was put together, it hadn't been made. So what we're suggesting is that you approve moving the report into open. The attachments are required to stay into closed. You can have the discussion in open, and any questions around the attachments we'd have to move into confidential to discuss.
Happy to move.
Do we have a seconder? Is there any discussion on that? No? Heidi moved it. And Marcus
Doesn't want to say anything at all.
So all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. We're still in public. So the discussion is in public, but the attachments are staying in confidential. Okay, thank you.
Sure. So maybe be just guided on how much detail you want here, but I can maybe just sit through what the report is asking for and just provide a little bit of update since we last spoke to you about this. Would that be acceptable? So this report is following on from the announcement from the Minister to support Tauranga with $45 million of grant funding for the construction of the Cameron Road multimodal project, stage 1, which is from the CBD to 17th Ave, effectively to the hospital, and also to support the planning and business case and preliminary design for stage 2, which extends from the hospital effectively to Barks Corner at the end of Greerton. So what we're asking for through this report is your support to proceed to confirm agreements around that funding, and for the delegation to the Chief Executive to work through the detail of that agreement. In confidential, there is the first draft of that agreement, which you have in your agenda. We've provided comments on that. We are now on the second draft, but there are no substantive changes to note. I will let Brendan just in a moment talk through the detail of the project, exactly what are we signing up to and in what time frames. But I think it's important just to note in terms of the other resolutions here that we're asking for, is that the project involves clearways initially, so part-time busways, and NZTA and the Regional Council and ourselves are very keen to move those to full-time busways in the future, so looking to put an MOU around that issue to provide some certainty of that transition, which would be over a period to be negotiated, but within a 5 to 10 year time frame. Brendan can speak, I think I'll let you speak a little bit, Brendan, to the stakeholder engagement that will now follow up as part of this announcement. Oh, my computer has just died, so I've lost the last resolution there. That's just the confidential, so over to you, Brendan.
Okay, in terms of the project scope, we are looking at a project that involves initially peak hour bus lanes with a separated cycleway. Our preferred option is option 8, as we discussed last week, so that looks at a two-way cycleway on one side of the road. But wider than that specific work, we are looking at intersection improvements, better connectivity for pedestrians, safety upgrades at intersections as we go through. So it's a corridor project, but I guess the key components of it are around that multimodal work that's coming into it. But it's not just that, it is improvements along the corridor. In terms of consultation, we do need to go back to the stakeholders and the community. So we did some work in 2019, 2018. That wasn't complete, so we need to go back with that. I guess the difference here is in accepting the funding from the Crown, the multimodal component is given now. So the community potentially initially, we were only discussing the possibility of that and what that could look like. Now we'd be going back saying that component is fundamentally part of the project. What the consultation is around, how do the implications of that, how do we address those, how do we change the side roads, the parking provision to make it still viable for businesses to remain.
And just as a final point from me, just in terms of recommendation C, where it refers to NZTA, we also request that we add the words and BOPRC, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, into that resolution.
Thanks, Andy and Brendan. And my apologies for not being here for all of that time. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, Brendan or Andy, the option 8, we still haven't, I don't think we've actually formally resolved that, but your recommendation is option 8. So as we go back to consult with stakeholders, there can still be a bit of, we're not going to throw out the multimodal out of it, but there may still be some issues addressed by what they raise and so on before we hit on a final plan from 17th Ave through to Elizabeth, and then the issue of what's still to be addressed between Elizabeth and Harrington Street, I think. Can you clarify?
Yeah, no, I can. So we are still in that final stages of modelling both option 2 and option 8. At this stage, it looks like option 8 gives us better outcomes, but the exact detail of that isn't locked down. So when we talk option 8, it's at a very high level. the detail isn't locked down. So there's a lot of scope still for tweaking and changing to make it work.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, Kelvin.
Yeah, thanks, Andy and Brendan. And Alistair, welcome. Just looking at a bit of social media commentary over the last few days, and there's been some concern that this $45 million would be better spent addressing the Haireni Bridge, four-laning 15th Ave, and then some saying that, well, even if we don't do that, from 17th Ave to Barks Corner is more of a choke point than 17th Ave to Elizabeth Street. So with that in mind, did we, so first of all, in terms of the Cameron Road corridor, the first part of it, Elizabeth Street to 17th Avenue, we've chosen that as first cab off the rank, as it were. So if you can address that concern, comparing that to the rest of Cameron Road, but also did we in our CIP funding applications look at funding for the Haireni Bridge and 15th Avenue? Just refresh our memory on that. Thank you.
So the CIP application process were for projects that would be shovel ready, i.e. that construction could commence within 12 months. We all know that there's a range of challenges on our transport network around Tauranga. Many of those are not progressed sufficiently that they are shovel ready within 12 months. 15th Ave and Turret Road is one of those, as is the second stage of Cameron Road. So we did put a significant number of projects forward through CIP and a number of transport projects, but this was the one that was chosen by the Minister and through that process.
Thank you very much, Andy. Yako. Valeria.
I was going to say, happy to move, considering this is...
Wait a second.
Right, we have a mover and a seconder, and we'll just continue the questions. Larry, followed by Andrew. Oh, sorry.
Just so that I'm aware and I've done the right thing by a few people that have spoken to me recently, the Ngātai Road example, is that what is going to be happening to Cameron Road in principle?
No, it will look quite different to Ngātai Road. Cameron Road has more space, so we've got more ability to have distinct vehicle lanes, PT lanes, separated cycleway potentially on one side, and footpaths.
Andrew.
Will it mean that there will be less room for cars on Cameron Road?
No, there's sufficient to have the lanes that currently exist for vehicles can remain.
2 lanes for cars, 1 lane for a bus, and a separated cycleway on both sides? Or will one separated cycleway?
That's option 2. So option 8, which is currently looking to be the preferred, option 2 had 1 cycle lane each side. Yep, but 2 vehicle lanes, 1 PT lane each side, and then either cycle lane each side or a 2-way.
Is that 6 lanes?
Can I just for clarity, is that correct, Brendan, on Cameron Road?
Yes, it is. Yep. So we've got 2 vehicle lanes.
Just, I think we need, just to clarify, at the moment, large portions of Cameron Road, in fact, all of Cameron Road has 4 dedicated, if you like, private vehicle lanes. Will the new model have 4 private vehicle lanes, I think is the question. Yeah.
Yes, it will. The PT lane goes into the space that's currently allocated for parking, so that's why they're part-time when they initially start.
I think beyond 17th Ave, there are sections of Cameron Road that do only have 2 vehicle lanes, 1 in each direction, and that will be addressed at a future point.
Sure, and again, just for clarity, in effect, the road, it doesn't seem to narrow in, but it is narrowed by the structure of the buildings around it. So it lacks that, what was a double-lane footpath, if you will. At that point, post 17th, 18th Ave, it becomes a bit narrower. Is that correct?
The road reserve is certainly narrower in parts, particularly around the hospital, yes.
Exactly, around the hospital, yeah. I think we need to be very clear about what we're talking about here and get a universal, to use the term, understanding of what's happening.
Can I ask a
Just 2 secs. I can feel a. Yeah, Alistair, did you want to add to this?
No, only that the modelling is still confirming the operational characteristics of this, and that will finalise the final layout, but it's been described to yourselves.
Very good. Heidi, and followed by Jaco. Thank you.
is the middle island then narrowing, or is it stays the same?
No, my understanding at the moment, based on the concept design we have, is it stays.
Thank you, Jaco. Larry, did you have a question?
No, I was hoping to move it to my younger colleague.
And younger and better looking colleague. Yeah, okay, sure. Just checking that you got that. All right, are there any more questions of clarification for these three wise men? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, look, 45 million. I'll take that most of the time. What else are we putting in? So we're talking about, people are listening, maybe someone's listening somewhere out there, from Elizabeth to 17th, 4 lanes, so all the car people are happy. The commercial people are unhappy because no one can park outside their premises because that's all become bus lanes. We'll figure that out. Then it's clear. So, and 45 million, we know that's coming in. What's the other amount of money that needs to go in to make that happen? Or does 45 million cover the whole lot? And by the whole lot, I mean everything. Or how much are we signing up to?
So I think the first point is that the $45 million is grant funding, so it doesn't have to be repaid. I think in terms of the budget issue for the project, maybe Brendan's better to speak to that.
So our understanding at the moment, and we've done high-level cost estimates, is 45 million covers everything. Now we have to do a review of that cost, but at this stage we anticipate 45 million is the cost to do this project plus the feasibility study for stage 2 without any council contribution. Just to confirm just to clarify one thing, the bus lanes initially are peak hour bus lines, so they only operate in peak hour, so inbound in the morning it's probably something like 7 till 9, and then parking is available in that space.
Supplementary, because I noticed with clause and supplementary,
They become permanent, but the timeline for that is still to be determined. We think somewhere between year 5 and 10.
So, Brendan, this is an old-fashioned term, maybe it's a clearway, is that what we call it still?
Clearway or a part-time bus lane, peak hour bus lane. So, yes, the bus lane only operates probably between certain hours, and then other than that, parking is available in that space.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other questions? Council? Very good. Sorry, who? Jaco.
So I think we put forward a whole lot of projects to central government. They get to choose what they want to invest in. So this is something that council saw a need for. This was something that was already on our books. And this is $45 million that we've been given as a grant, which I think we should jump at. And, there's still water to go under the bridge in terms of the detailed design, but 2 lanes, a bus lane and a 2-way cycle lane sounds a lot better than what we currently have there at the moment. Also some amenity upgrade that will support the zoning changes that we made. So, it all makes sense to me. And I'll wait to hear and see if there's any arguments that need responding to.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Jaco. This is a really amazing anchor project for Te Papa and for the plan changes to take place. And you can really visualise how changing the aspect of the street, the people-focused result that we'll get out from this will enable more intensification along that area and really support future outcomes. So, well done. Good news.
Thanks very much, Heidi. Larry.
Yeah, it's a very tough decision. I'm sort of agonising over it. Will we take 45 million from the government? Yes, of course we will. The answer to those who are pondering about whether we should use this for 15th Ave, of course, has been explained in the questions. But we can phrase it back to them that because we've got this 45 million, we may now be able to find funding for what is needed to be done in Turret Road and 15th Ave, because we're not having to find this money for the work. And I think that might encourage them, that they may still see progress on that part of the network which does need attention, and probably a bit more money than 45 million to sort out. But this is going to be a staged approach, and what we see around the table is a transform to Papa Peninsula, and this corridor is very much a part of it. So whilst we may wrestle still with the public about parking and businesses that are along there, which I think the Chief Executive referred to some meetings ago as one of the reasons we drained out the CBD. But what we need to fix on is the vision for a whole transformed corridor that has intensified buildings on the sides of it, which may not necessarily need parking on that road anymore as development occurs. Commercial may be on the ground floor, but it may have then parking behind it, and so on. That's what has to take place. This is a long-term project, and we won't be just rushing in tomorrow, as some are worried, to take away the parking. It will be an ongoing event, but it is certainly an exciting one. And as someone who's been chairing what's been, all those committees for so long, I'm thrilled that we can finally get to the funding part of it, and that the government has come to the party, and we can look forward to it rolling out. The final sort of design, I still have questions about cycleways with 23 avenues along there. It's a challenge, but we'll work them through and get it there for cyclists, for public transport, and for those like myself who still drive in their electric car without any CO2 emissions every day.
Tremendous. Thank you very much, Larry. John.
As is so often the case, I find myself agreeing wholeheartedly with Councillor Balder, and his younger, better-looking, more woke, more 21st century colleague who moved the motion, and my colleague who supported the creation of the ISAB so ably. Look, this makes sense, and in all seriousness, there are issues to be worked out. The parking one is an obvious one, but the idea that all parking has to be immediately in front of the building as opposed to within the building or underneath the building or behind the building would be a very poor reason to turn down 45 million. The arguments made by Councillor Baldock with regard to Hyrene is this is a $45 million grant. I just wanted to check, and my question was, sometimes $45 million grants don't have to be repaid, they just come with the unfortunate requirement that you have to invest 145 million to complete the project. That's not the case. They're paying the whole bill, and that road, if we get it right, will be part of the, I don't use the word transformation, the slow and hopefully well thought out evolution of our city over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I endorse it. This is a good news story. I hope it makes the front page of the Bay of Plenty Times. It'll make a pleasant change from things that I've seen recently on the front page of the Bay of Plenty Times. I wholeheartedly commend this not only to my colleagues, but also to Samantha Motion of the Bay of Plenty Times. Thank you very much.
Very good, John. It might come with your photo, which would be a pleasant change too. Kelvin.
I don't think it would be that pleasant, to be honest, but however. Look, I mean, for many years and over many councils, we've been, going on about central government needing to, pony up and put funds, into these sort of projects. And so now we're seeing the fruition of that. Some might say too little, too late, but I certainly appreciate the $45 million from central government. And if we were to turn it down today, I think we'd be nuts.
Well said. just to add to this, because I think it really is exciting, and I think it needs a bit of context. On Saturday, the Mayor has cut the ribbon on the salt development. For those that haven't seen it on Girvan Road, I commend it to you, because from my perspective, it's an exemplar of what intensification can look like. It is fantastic. From memory, 71 or 72 units split between townhouses and apartments. It has a creche, an organic creche, which is to say in situ, and a cafe, which is going to be a good cafe. It's going to be run by people that know what they're doing. Yet to be announced, but very good. The reason I raised salt, and my memory of Cameron Road as a kid, cycling up and down as we did, and Larry, Bill, help me here, is that there was a very wide thing called a cycleway, but we didn't call it that, we called it a footpath. And one was a footpath, and it had a picture of a person walking on it, and one was a cycle way, and it had a, Kelvin, you'll know this as well. And they were divided, and I think the cycleway was a bit wider, it was only on the eastern side, and the footpath was a bit narrower, so if you couldn't figure out what the pictures meant, you just looked at the width and decided where to ride. This to me is back to the future. You know, this is putting in the stuff that we used to do as kids, that generation, and generations well before us did. We walked or we rode bikes everywhere. Didn't have cars. We did what we did, and this city particularly accommodated that. So I don't know what happened in between, but I'm thrilled that we're getting back there in some more modern form. I think it's fantastic. And the other point I'd make about the $45 million for Te Papa, and having been down, as you know, in Wellington for the last 2 days and meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister Jones and Minister Tabato, I think we've done really well in the scheme. They are enjoying the relation. This is the government, I'm not talking about New Zealand First, just happened, and I did meet with Twyford, as you know, but they're enjoying the relationship they've got with Tauranga. Tauranga has got almost, but probably not quite mathematically, the $1.1 billion that we sought. We got 900 for the TNL. This was well before all this stuff happened, that we were, you know, that we now, everybody's crying around the region saying we got this and we got that. Mayor Weber got 14, I'm happy to be corrected here, but 14 million for Omokoroa, and I think it was 18 million for Rangiuru. 45 for Te Papa is, you know, not quite 1.1, it's about $1 billion. So I think as a region, we can say we're doing okay. And there might be a bit more to come. In fact, I hope there is. We still don't know where we're going to land on curbside collection. I'm a little bit bullish, but we'll see. And I think we're doing okay. But this Te Papa, because we're talking about it, multimodal, shovel-ready project is incredibly important to undo and unlock that whole spine, the main spine, as it's called by the government, but the ridgeline of Te Papa. So incredibly important. And there's other things that can come from that. So I'm pleased that you're heartened, because I think we should be pretty heartened as a council that we have managed to achieve this, together with a whole lot of regional partners and many others who have fought very hard for the city. So, Jaco.
Yeah, we'll exercise the right to reply this time. I think no one's under any illusions that this is going to be a painless process. This is going to be a very difficult project, and we're going to be in the newspaper a lot, I suspect, because it's a long stretch of road. In terms of our finances, I think we're still short a lot. So we have received this funding, which helps a lot, and it's a lifeline from the government, but we still are short. I don't think we have that billion that we still need. But I think my main point is just a big thank you to the decision makers in Wellington that decided on this. Yep, we appreciate it, and we'd love some more.
Very good. Thank you, Jaco. Which brings us to the resolution. Which is, the 5 resolutions. Are you happy that we take this all in one part? Thank you. So I just put it to you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much, Council. And can I just get a mover and a second to move into public excluded, please? Deputy Mayor Salisbury and Councillor Clout, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. And carried. Thank you.